After washing her hands, Amy walked over and squatted beside Ugly Duckling. She also looked up at Meg with her mouth wide open. Meow, Ugly Duckling turned to look at Amy with a hint of resentment in its eyes. This is my father. Amy looked back at Ugly Duckling with a serious expression. Meow, meow, Ugly Duckling immediately gave in. It turned its head sideways and rubbed Amy's calf as obedient as it could be. All right, both of you. Meg nodded with a smile. He peeled another prawn and fed it to Amy. Amy took a small bite of the prawn. Her eyes lit up as she chewed happily. She looked at Meg happily and said, Father, this prawn is really delicious, and I really ate a lot of prawn meat today. Father really wouldn't lie to me. Eat more if you like it. Meg looked at Amy's adorable table manners, and the smile on his face became even brighter. The greatest sense of accomplishment was probably when he was praised by his own daughter. It was indeed very important to keep one's promise to one's children. The story of Zhangzi killing the swine had been passed down for thousands of years. It was full of the wisdom of the ancients in educating children. The breakfast passed in a happy atmosphere because the two little guys really liked it. They finished the whole plate of braised prawns. Meg didn't even taste a single one himself, but judging from the satisfied expressions of the two little guys, it should be good. System, will it be dangerous for me to hunt in this state? Meg asked in his mind as he put away the bowls. Please rest assured, host. There is a 50% chance of survival, the system's calm voice sounded. Meg's hand trembled, and the bowl in his hand almost fell. He said with a strange expression, System, isn't it just catching a chicken? Why is there a 50% chance of death? It's too easy to die, isn't it? In the wilderness, the situation changes rapidly. Turkeys can only be regarded as the lowest level magic beast, but the host may encounter some powerful magic beasts in the process of searching for turkeys. The probability of this happening is about 50%. So, as long as I touch it, I'll die. Am I that weak? Meg couldn't help complaining in his mind. Host, do you think you are very powerful? The system asked back. Meg thought for a moment. It had only been 2 days since he recovered from his semi-disabled state. If he encountered a second-level magic beast, his chance of survival was indeed 0. He couldn't help but complain. System, are you pushing me into a fire pit? Can't you just cook? Why do you want to eat chicken? The host can increase the chance of survival by purchasing items up to 99%. The system's voice suddenly became brisk. This is your ultimate goal, isn't it? Meg suddenly felt a little absurd. This money-hungry system was really unscrupulous in order to make money. I don't have the money to buy a weapon of 1,000 gold coins, Meg calmly said as he walked to the kitchen with the bowl. The system provides a daily weapon rental service. It only costs 10 gold coins a day to enjoy a top-level custom-made weapon. If you rent it for more than 7 days, you can enjoy a 10% discount. The system also provides a daily rental service for armor of various prices, including one-time magic shields, one-time magic attack waves, one-time. The system's voice was full of enthusiasm. Meg's face darkened. It seemed that the system had seen through his acting skills and was getting more and more sophisticated. He suddenly asked, System, if I bring Amy with me, what are my chances of survival? The system was silent for a while, then said with some difficulty, 100%? What the hell is that? Meg was shocked. Amy is much more powerful than you, the system said quietly. As long as I bring Amy with me, my chances of survival are really 100%? Meg wasn't the least bit unhappy that his daughter had outshone him. According to the system's precise calculations, it is 100%. The system replied with certainty, then solemnly suggested, however, the system does not recommend the host to bring Amy with him. This is a serious cheating behavior and will be severely condemned. Moreover, Amy's studies are more important. If she skips class on the second day of school, it will not be good for her to develop good study habits. Chapter 217. Skipping class. Amy, who was playing with Ugly Duckling with a small piece of cloth, turned to look at Meg in confusion. We're not going to class today. We're going out of the city to catch a combat chicken. Meg nodded. In this life, he cherished his life even more. Since the system said that he would be 100% safe as long as he brought Amy along, this was naturally the best choice. Even if there was only a 1% risk, he didn't want to try his luck. He couldn't bear to leave Amy alone. Amy's eyes lit up when she heard that, and she asked expectantly, "Then can we have chicken for dinner?" "Yes." Meg nodded. Okay. Then let's set off now to catch a chicken." Amy jumped down from her chair and urged happily, "Wait a moment. I'll write 2 leave requests first. One for Teacher Crassus and the other for the customers," Meg said with a smile. He walked to the counter, took out a pen and paper, and wrote 2 leave requests. Since Crassus was on sick leave, it was even easier for the guests. "Can Ugly Duckling come with us?" Amy asked as she hugged Ugly Duckling. Ugly Duckling also looked at him pitifully. "System, will bringing Ugly Duckling affect the survival rate?" Meg asked in his mind. "There will be a certain positive effect if you bring it along," the system replied. "Then bring it along." Meg looked at Amy with a smile. Although he didn't know what the system meant by positive effect, it sounded like there would be benefits to bringing this little fellow along. "Let's go." Meg carried a small bag with a bottle of water, for bhaji buns, and some seasonings in it. Since they were going to travel in the wilderness, of course he had to bring the necessary supplies. Otherwise, the system would most likely scam him later. Pulling the bicycle out, Meg pasted a leave of absence slip on the door. "I'm going out to gather ingredients. I'm taking a day off. I'll be making a new dish tomorrow. Please look forward to it." It was only slightly past 6 a.m., so there were no customers at the entrance. Meg then rode his bicycle to the entrance of Chaos School and handed the leave request slip to the guard so that he could pass it to the Crassus. "Grandpa Radish, Uncle Red-Haired Turtle, goodbye." Amy sat in the back seat and waved at the 2 of them. "The little girl doesn't look sick at all, does she?" Antoine glanced at the leave slip in his hand and exchanged a look with Arnaud. Both of them had strange expressions on their faces. "Father, are we going out of the city now?" Amy has never left the city since she was young. What was outside the city? Daphne said that there are many terrifying magic beasts outside the city. Her father is a very powerful mercenary, and he brings back a lot of prey every time he comes back. Amy was sitting in the back seat, and she was very curious about the world outside the city walls. "We have to go to the Chaos Guild first. We have to find out where we can catch turkeys first." Meg smiled. He was in a good mood. Although he had already been tricked by the system, he decided to take Amy on an outing. Seeing her happy face, it was all worth it. The Chaos Guild was the only mercenary guild in Chaos City. They received countless bounty missions from all over the continent every day. The difficulty of the missions and the rewards varied greatly, so countless mercenary groups, adventurers gathered there. It was the largest mercenary guild on the Norland continent and had the most registered mercenaries. "Are we going to become mercenaries too?" Amy's eyes immediately lit up. "Yes. Let's go and see if there are any missions to catch turkeys." Meg nodded with a smile. If the system didn't require him to capture turkeys personally, then Meg would have issued a mercenary mission directly. However, there were only 2 options now. The first was to buy the map of turkeys, which was probably a little expensive. The second was to accept a mission to catch turkeys, which should come with a free map. The Chaos Guild was located outside the Aiden Square near the city walls. The Aiden Square was round, and the Chaos Guild was in the corner. Meg stopped the car and said to Ugly Duckling, who was lying on its back in the car seat, "Ugly Duckling, you can watch the car from here." "Meow." Ugly Duckling meowed, but its eyes still couldn't focus. It was already a useless cat. Meg looked up at the huge black stone building in front of him and was also a little stunned. The main body of the building was 20 meters tall, and the black stone surface was a little rough, making it look very rough and grand. There were 8 white stone pillars in front of the palace, and they were as tall as the stone building. They were lined up in a row, creating a grand sight to behold. It was said that these 8 stone pillars represented the 8 major races that had signed the Armistice Agreement in Chaos City. The originally smooth stone pillars had been weathered by wind and rain for decades, and many wrinkles had appeared on their surfaces, giving them a sense of vicissitudes. There was no writing on the stone hall, but there was a round emblem at the center of the hall. Inside the emblem was a white dove holding an olive branch in its mouth. This was the emblem of Chaos City. It was said that after the armistice agreement was signed, representatives of all races fought tooth and nail over the emblem of Chaos City. All of them wanted to use their own race as the emblem of peace, and it almost triggered a second racial war. At this moment, a white dove holding an olive branch in its mouth flew past the venue, and the elven representative suggested that the white dove should be used as the emblem of Chaos City, which was approved by all parties. Perhaps this is some kind of historical coincidence? Meg smiled as he held Amy's little hand and walked toward the main gate of the guild. The Chaos Guild was backed by the Grey Temple and the City Lord's Castle, so they also used Chaos City's emblem. The gate that was 10 meters tall was wide open. Even Chaos City's city gate wasn't as tall as this. A forest troll that was 7 to 8 meters tall, with dark green skin and creepers crawling all over its back, strode past Meg and Amy, and the ground trembled slightly with each step it took. "Hey, big guy, watch where you're going." A team of about 30 goblins walked out of the palace with bows and magic staffs in their hands, and they were about to encounter the forest troll. The leader of the goblins was slightly older, and he yelled at the forest troll in a sharp voice. "Big guy, Little Red Riding Hood." Amy's eyes widened as she stared at the Little Red Riding Hood on the goblins' heads. Meg was also looking at this scene with surprise. Those goblins were only half a meter tall, and only reached the forest troll's ankles. A single stomp from the forest troll would be enough to wipe them out. However, they were fully equipped, so they weren't weak, either. Would there be a clash between the two? "Captain, could it be that he didn't hear us?" a young goblin in the team asked worriedly. Chapter 218. Stop your steps. Otherwise, this will be seen as a great threat to us. Seeing the approaching foot, the goblin captain's expression became more and more serious. His hand was already on the hilt of his sword as he shouted loudly. The goblins had already drawn their long swords and raised their magic staffs. A battle was about to begin. At this moment, the forest troll that had been ignoring them and raising its right leg to stomp down on the goblin team suddenly felt something and stopped in its tracks. It lowered its head to look at the forest trolls at its feet, scratched its head, and turned its steps to the side as it continued to walk in. "Captain, I feel like that big guy is insulting us," the first goblin who had drawn his sword said angrily. He looked like he was about to rush up and hack at him. "Let's go. Fighting is not allowed near the Chaos Guild. Otherwise, your membership will be permanently revoked." "That big guy just has bad hearing," the captain said calmly as he let go of his long sword and left. But the youth still wanted to say something. "Let's go. Do you really think you can fight with him?" a middle-aged goblin beside him said with a smile as he patted his shoulder lightly. "I." The youth turned around to look at the forest troll's huge back. He hesitated for a moment, but still chose to quickly follow, looking a little disheartened. "Rules, order, strength and weakness. Interesting." Meg looked at this scene and the corners of his mouth curled up. If this was a different place, he would probably be able to watch a battle before entering. "Let's go." Meg held Amy's little hand and continued walking. "Father, if that big guy and those little ones were to fight, who would win?" Amy looked up at Meg curiously as she asked. "Probably the big guy," Meg said with a smile. "But Little Red Riding Hood and the others have more people." Amy was still a little confused. "True strength doesn't need to make a sound to make others back down." Meg shook his head. "Oh." Amy nodded thoughtfully. She turned back to look at the goblins in the distance and said with a smile, "But they're still very brave." Big Guy gave in to them. Yes. Meg was a little surprised at Amy's understanding of the situation, but when he thought about it carefully, there was indeed no problem. "Wow, what a big house." Amy couldn't help but exclaim as soon as the two of them entered the main hall. Her eyes widened as she looked around. Meg's eyes were also filled with amazement. Although he had Meg Alex's memories of the Chaos Guild, he was still amazed by the superb construction skills of the otherworldly craftsman when he saw it with his own eyes. There were 2 floors in the hall, and each floor was covered with a layer of dust. It looked like a busy airport. In the middle of the hall, there was a magic crystal wall with information scrolling on it. Mercenaries and adventurers of various races were looking up at the missions with serial numbers. After selecting a suitable mission, they would go to the registration desk to receive and register the mission. There were dozens of such crystal walls. The Mercenary Guild had already categorized the information in advance. They were distributed according to the Daily Activities section, Combat section, Spirit Beast section, Material section, Food section, for example. In the Daily Activities section, there were missions to collect debts, find pets, and take care of children. Meg even saw a mission to send flowers to a girl he liked. The reward for the mission was 10 copper coins, and it was quickly claimed by a little girl. Mag brought Amy to the ingredients section and began to search seriously with his head tilted upward. The food section was one of the more lively sections. There were many mercenaries standing in front of 2 large magic crystal boards that were 5 meters tall. There were elves, humans, orcs, and demons. Some were in groups of 3 to 5, and some were alone. They were all selecting suitable missions. Some restaurants in Chaos City liked to serve food made from high-level magic beasts, and the customers were curious. Even if the price was high and the taste was average, they would still go and try it. It was similar to the rich people in his previous life eating wild animals. It was just that there was no one to protect these animals in this world, and they had to rely on themselves. The high-level magic beasts were very powerful, and their rewards were also very high. For example, the number 1/8 tier magic beast, the 3 silver-haired leopards, had a reward of 10,000 gold coins. This was Mamie's net profit for the past half a month. Further down, there were 7th tier, 6th tier, 5th tier. All kinds of magic beasts were listed on the list, and their prices were clearly marked. Meg saw the huge potential of the foodies in this world. After all, there were people who offered a reward for 1 kilogram of the 1st tier magic beast, the withered leaf cicada. This deep-fried dark cuisine made Meg flinch at the sight of it. He didn't expect that there would be people in this world who liked it. He just didn't know how to cook it. Meg, who was carrying a strange backpack and a little lowly, attracted the attention of many mercenaries and adventurers. He didn't even have a single weapon on him. It was rare to see someone carrying a little lowly out on a mission. Usually, there would be women who would bring their children out for daily missions in the daily mission section. However, the food ingredients section usually posted all kinds of ingredients that weren't easy to find in the market, and most of them were the meat of various magic beasts. Even a 1st-tier magic beast could easily kill 10 normal people. The withered leaf cicada, which was valued by the kilogram, was not something to be trifled with. Its wings, which were like withered leaves, could fly out like 2 flying daggers at a critical moment, easily piercing through the throat and killing in one shot. But this guy didn't bring anything with him and only brought a child along? It's autumn now. Are you planning to bring the child for an autumn outing? An honest-looking uncle asked Meg with a smile. This little girl was so beautiful, and he couldn't bear to see her being dragged into a trap by this hot-headed old man. He wanted to give him some advice. Meg was stunned for a moment and then nodded with a smile. Yes, I'm planning to bring the child out of the city. He didn't care about everyone's gazes. After all, it wouldn't hurt him to be stared at a few more times. Besides, he had already found the fire chicken mission. Food, mission number 256. Capture a wild fire chicken alive. Reward, 10 gold coins. The autumn outing is to the north. It's beautiful everywhere outside the city. Don't you see the Chaos School spring and autumn excursions go that way every year? The scenery there is beautiful, and there's no danger. The child will definitely like it. As for the missions, you can do them anytime. You should have fun with the child. That uncle frowned. He didn't expect this kid to really bring the child to the autumn outing, and he was really going to take the mission together. The missions above weren't simple. No one would post missions for ingredients that could be bought in the market here. Chapter 219. Meg handed a black iron card with a white dove printed on it to the staff at the window and said, Food, task number 256. The height of the window could only see half of the person's face. It should be a young girl. This iron card was issued to every member of the Chaos Guild when they joined. It was a bit similar to a membership card. The magician made the iron card have a certain storage function. The information of each member was recorded in it, and every time a member did a task, it would be recorded in it to upgrade the member's level. Meg should be a 1-star member now. Meg Alex could only take some very daily tasks because of his physical condition, which were so simple that even children could complete them. However, there were a lot of tasks, so in 3 years, he had successfully upgraded from a 0-star member to a 1-star member. The staff refreshed Meg's information. After glancing at it, she couldn't help but confirm it again. Is it a task to catch turkeys? Yes. Meg nodded. Sir, although your star level has reached 1 star, the task to go out of the city to catch magical beasts is very dangerous. Turkeys are level 1 magical beasts. They are very aggressive. Are you sure you want to take it? The staff lowered her head and looked at Meg through the small window and asked again. Meg had done hundreds of tasks before, all of which were daily tasks. They were all things to help people deliver things or fetch things for people. This kind of thing was generally done by children or people with disabilities. Listening to Meg's voice, she was afraid that it was the latter. However, when she saw Meg standing outside, she was taken aback again. He was about 30 years old, and he was wearing a light gray shirt and trousers. His short hair was very neatly combed, and the faint mustache on his upper lip added to his mature charm. She couldn't help but blush. He didn't look like a man who had completed hundreds of the simplest missions. Well, I know. Meg smiled and nodded. Although he was a little helpless, he still felt the concern from strangers, whether it was the uncle just now or the staff now. Well, may I ask if you need a map of the areas where the turkeys frequently appear? The girl also realized that she had lost her composure, so she quickly sat up straight and asked. Yes. Meg nodded. This was the purpose of his trip. The price of 1 map is 1 gold coin. You have to pay in cash. I wish you success in your mission. The girl took out a small rolled-up map and placed it together with the iron plate before handing it over. Thank you. Meg paid the money, took the token, and held Amy's hand as they walked toward the entrance of the hall. Did this guy just get the fire rooster's quest? Yes. The offensive power of a fire rooster is considered to be in the middle level of a first-level magical beast. Even if an ordinary first-level knight is fully armed, he may not be able to defeat it. But he didn't even have a weapon and brought a little lowly with him. Isn't this clearly courting death? Poor little girl. How did she meet such an unreliable father? Everyone looked at Meg's back and began to discuss animatedly. I hope he can successfully complete the mission. The girl lowered her head to look at Meg's back and thought to herself, Food. Mission number 87. 3-star bronze-skinned wild boar. I want a map. Guy handed over the black token in his hand and looked back at Meg and Amy who were walking out of the guild. He shook his head helplessly. He had already reminded Meg, but Meg didn't seem to have any intention of changing his mind. If he met them by chance later, he might be able to help them. That would depend on their luck. As an experienced hunter, he had 100 ways to subdue a fire rooster, but the requirements on the list were too low. It wasn't worth it to catch only 1 fire rooster a day. After leaving the hall, Amy looked up at Meg and asked, Father, why do they all say that we can't catch a fire rooster? Because they don't know how powerful Meg is. Meg touched Amy's head and said with a smile, No, they don't know how powerful Father is. Father is super powerful. Amy shook her head and said seriously, It's all right. It's fine as long as little Amy knows. Meg had a look of satisfaction on his face. His daughter was really good at complimenting others. Yes, Father is the best anyway. Amy nodded happily. She let go of Meg's hand and ran to the bicycle. Ugly Duckling was hanging pitifully from the basket and looking at them with resentment. System, I want to rent a sword. Daily rent, Meg said in his mind as he walked slowly. Ding. 10 gold coins have been deducted. Ding. The longsword is being customized. It will be completed in 5 minutes. Please choose a place to receive it. The system's voice quickly sounded. Give it to me after we leave the city. I also want to park the bicycle for a day. How much does it cost? Meg continued to ask calmly. 1 gold coin for a day. The system's voice sounded. Okay. Meg nodded. After they left Chaos City, they would face danger. Although the system said it was 100% safe, he still had to be 100% alert to ensure Amy's safety. He decided to complete this mission using Meg Alex's way of thinking. Meg Alex became a knight at the age of 30. Apart from being strong, he was also an outstanding general. He was bold but careful. If it weren't for the promise of meeting an old friend, he wouldn't have been in such a desperate situation. The world was a place for people, and he didn't have any. Catching a fire chicken was not a task in his eyes. However, there was only one way to deal with all kinds of magic beasts in his mind: kill them with a sword. It was simple and violent, but it also represented extreme confidence. Meg wanted to say, "Son of a bitch." The swordsmanship and sword skills in his mind had merged with his memory. Swordsmanship was a set of moves to use a sword. Usually, it was a set. Meg had learned a set of heavy swordsmanship passed down from Alex's family when he was in elementary school. He started to use a 50-kilogram heavy sword at the age of 15. Meg's current physical fitness was about the same as when he was 10 years old. However, in order to increase the agility of the heavy sword, he learned a light and fast sword technique. The sword technique had a total of 13 styles. It was recorded in the nameless sword manual that he found when he killed the first evil dragon and counted the spoils in the dragon's cave. He called it the 13 Shadow Swords. At his peak, he could move a 50-kilogram heavy sword so fast that its shadow couldn't be seen. This speed was enough to make men fall silent, women cry, and dragons despair. With Meg's current physical fitness, even if he used an ordinary long sword, he should only be able to use the first 3 moves of the 13 Shadow Swords, and it would be far from reaching the level of Shadowless. Chapter 220. Let's go out of the city. Meg collected his thoughts and made his way over to Amy and Ugly Duckling. Let's go. Ugly Duckling, this is our first time out of the city, Amy said happily with Ugly Duckling in her arms. Meow, meow. Ugly Duckling was also looking around excitedly. Its resentment from being left here alone to look after the carriage had been completely wiped away. Meg found an excuse to get the system to put away the bicycle, and then led Amy along the smooth black stone road toward the South Gate. The South Gate of Chaos City was right across from the Chaos Guild. The city wall was about 15 meters tall, and the city gate was about 8 meters tall. This level of city wall wasn't considered very tall on the Norland continent. The first city wall of Rodu in the Roth Empire was 60 meters tall and 5 meters thick, and could withstand a brief attack from a 10th-tier giant dragon. Chaos City was built by all races, and in order to show peace, the height and thickness of the city wall weren't too exaggerated. However, this didn't mean that Chaos City's defenses were very weak. Back then, the magic casters of all races had carved countless magic spell formations on the city wall, and in the past century, the magic casters of Chaos City were still constantly adding and repairing them. The magic of all races had fused together on the city wall, and Chaos City had become one of the most difficult cities to conquer on the entire Norland continent. There were 8 soldiers in black uniforms standing in 2 rows at the city gate, and they had identical black long swords hanging from their waists as they scanned the people entering and leaving the city. Meg's gaze paused on their chests for a moment. They were all wearing Peace Dove badges, so it seemed that the city lord's castle was responsible for guarding the city. The badges of the Grey Temple were diamond-shaped and had a golden design on a gray background. The design differed according to the different duties. For example, the teachers of Chaos School were also considered subordinates of the Grey Temple, and their badges were a design of a pencil and a ruler. There were all kinds of mercenaries going in and out of the city gate. Aside from giant dragons going home, normal people wouldn't choose to leave the city from this direction. This was because there wasn't any beautiful scenery outside the southern part of the city. There were more dangerous places like the Dark Forest Swamp, the Silent Hills, the Abyss of Darkness, Stranglethorn Vale, and so on. There were all kinds of terrifying magic beasts in the wastelands outside the city, as well as some herbs and wild beasts that couldn't be found anywhere else. Danger often came with opportunity, so this place had become a paradise for the mercenaries. Wait, are you leaving the city? When Meg and Amy arrived at the city gate, a middle-aged guard in the queue suddenly reached out and stopped them. He looked at Meg and asked, "Yes, is there a problem?" Meg nodded with a smile. Buddy looked at Meg with a solemn expression and said, outside the southern part of the city is an extremely dangerous place. Magical beasts have already appeared within 5 kilometers of the city. Although I don't have the right to stop you from leaving the city, I have the duty to remind you that you may encounter danger if you take your child out of the city. Please think carefully about your actions. He had been guarding the south gate for more than 20 years, and he had seen many mercenaries who thought highly of themselves. However, it was the first time that he had seen someone like Meg, who was barehanded and carrying a little girl and a kitten out of the city. Wasn't this a joke? Every day, he would watch many mercenaries leave the city. When they returned at night, some of them would be missing. Some of them would be supported or carried back by their teammates. They might be missing a part of their body, or they might have lost their breath forever. Being a mercenary was a profession that danced on the edge of a knife. After leaving the city, even the simplest mission could lead to the threat of death. Although the Chaos Guild would update the map based on the information provided by the mercenaries every day, magical beasts wouldn't stay in one place forever. There might even be a 3-star magical beast waiting for you to jump into the 1-star area marked on the map. This kind of situation wasn't uncommon. The guards at the city gate and the mercenaries who just so happened to be passing by also turned to look at Mag with curiosity and bewilderment in their eyes. This immaculately dressed man with a fair complexion clearly hadn't been exposed to the sun much. Was he going to take the 2 little ones out of the city? Yes, I know that. Can we go now? Meg nodded with a smile. Good luck. Buddy took a deep look at Mag before retracting his hand. Thank you. Meg nodded. He held Amy's little hand and walked out with the crowd. Although he was looked down on along the way, he could feel that the other party had good intentions. They didn't put on any fancy mocking scenes. To be honest, Meg was a little disappointed. They didn't give him a chance to slap them in the face at all. Captain, will they be able to come back? That little girl is quite cute, a young guard asked softly. I hope so. Buddy withdrew his gaze from Meg and his daughter and continued to watch the people passing by. Wow, the outside world is so big. As soon as they walked out of the city gate, Amy opened her eyes wide and looked outside. The world that was blocked by the tall city walls suddenly opened up. In the distance, there were mountains and hills in a picturesque disorder. Some places were shrouded in fog, while others were still glowing during the day. Meg's eyes also lit up. At this moment, a black dot suddenly appeared in the distant sky. In an instant, it enlarged countless times and appeared above the crowd. A giant dragon! Someone exclaimed with a hint of excitement and fear. A giant dragon? Meg looked up and narrowed his eyes. Its huge wings blotted out the sun and cast a shadow on the ground. Its cold aura seemed to have frozen the air. This was a frost dragon with a wingspan of over 30 meters. Its body was covered in snowy white scales, and its huge body didn't appear bloated at all. It was elegant and majestic. A pair of deep blue eyes swept across the crowd below. Those who were swept by its gaze felt as if their blood had frozen for an instant. The city gate was completely silent. Most of the mercenaries didn't even dare to look up. They quickened their pace, trying to escape from the giant dragon's shadow. Although the giant dragons didn't rule the world during the racial war, it was undeniable that they were powerful individually. This frost dragon's power was at least comparable to a 7th-tier magic caster. This kind of power was already in the upper echelons of any species. The dignity of a powerhouse was not to be challenged. After leaving Chaos City, they would no longer be protected by the rules and laws of Chaos City. Huh, isn't this the giant dragon that Turtle Grandpa conjured? It's so beautiful. Right at this moment, Amy's elated voice sounded. Meow. Ugly Duckling also looked up at the frost dragon and extended its little paw with a hint of hostility in its eyes. Yes, it is indeed very beautiful. Mag nodded in agreement. Even though Mag Alex had many memories of slaying dragons, this was the first time he had seen a true giant dragon. It was as if it were a work of art that had been carved out of ice and snow. Mag's frost wings flapped gently, sweeping up a gust of wind and snow, completely erasing the impression that he had of a western dragon lizard with wings. This father and daughter. A strange expression appeared on the mercenary's face. He hurried over to Meg and Amy. Chapter 221. What's going on? Why isn't the restaurant open yet? Mr. Mack put up a notice. He said he went out to get ingredients, so the restaurant will be closed for the day. No way. Doesn't that mean I won't be able to eat tofu pudding and Yangzhou fried rice for the whole day? What's wrong with Mr. Mack? Is he too arrogant, or does he think we can't hold a knife anymore? Yeah, why didn't he put up a notice in advance? Not only did I make a wasted trip, but I also have to kneel on the washboard for my wife when I get back. There's no way to explain this. A group of customers who had come for breakfast early in the morning had gathered at the entrance of the restaurant. When they heard what the people inside said after seeing the notice, they all sighed and complained. Didn't Mr. Mack say he'll be closed for one day every 6 days? It's only the second day. Why is he suddenly closing for the day? Harrison asked in confusion. Yeah, I told Palmer to wait at home for a while this morning. I was going to bring him breakfast before he went to school. Now it's ruined again. George also sighed. He was having a headache. Didn't you see? Mr. Mack also said he'll be releasing a new dish tomorrow. I think he really went out to get ingredients today. Otherwise, with Mr. Mack's personality, he wouldn't stand us up so easily. Mabai sighed at the blacksmith's door. He was the first one to see the notice. It was a bit weird that he couldn't eat Yangzhou fried rice this morning, but he still believed in Meg's character. That's right. Every new dish that Boss Mag releases brings us unparalleled surprises and delicacies. He even went out of his way to collect ingredients himself. We should be more understanding of such a genius concept and such a serious attitude. You're right, but I'll just throw a knife here. I hope Mr. Mack knows what he'll face if he does this often. A young knight took out a small knife from his waist and threw it at the door. Ding, ding, ding. Suddenly, the door was filled with clinking sounds. Knives, daggers, and blades piled up into a small hill, and the number was still increasing. Aren't you open today? In a luxurious horse-drawn carriage outside, Gloria lifted a corner of the curtain and murmured to herself in disappointment. Even though she was still wearing her veil, she had changed into a long blue dress today, and her black cloak had also been replaced with a silver one. Her veil had also become a lot thinner and had been replaced with a light blue one. The lethargic feeling from before was swept away. Although her appearance was still unclear, the feeling she gave off was completely different. Her graceful figure and slightly curly long hair would definitely attract a lot of attention if she stepped out of the carriage. The new dish should be delicious, she murmured softly, put down the curtain and asked the coachman to go back. Today, Luo Xia had something to do and did not come. The 3 members of the Burning Legion finally squeezed their way to the door. Staring at the pile of blades and the notice on the door, they found it hard to accept. Boss, what should we do? If I don't eat Rujiamo for the whole day, I'll be exhausted. Mon said anxiously as he rubbed his big bald head. Yeah, I feel like I've suddenly lost my life goal today. Keel was also dejected. Bullshit. Look, even a genius like Mr. Mack went out to collect materials so early. Don't you feel embarrassed to be so dispirited? Do you have the right to lose your life goal? Sargeras knocked on their foreheads and waved his hand. Let's go. Today's mission will be doubled. Yesterday, we received news from our clan that the first batch of lava warriors has been assembled, and they will be leaving for Chaos City soon. We should at least treat our brothers from afar with a sumptuous meal of Rujiamo, right? For Rujiamo, Keel and Mon shouted at the same time. Their eyes were filled with fighting spirit. Mr. Mack, this guy. I thought something had happened to my precious apprentice when he asked for sick leave, but it seems like he's not sick at all. He just took her out to have fun, right? It's only the second day of school, and he's already skipping class. Crassus stared at the notice angrily. The sudden rise in temperature made the people around him take a few steps back. Then today is also your day. Amy will have to go to class with me the day after tomorrow, Julian said gloatingly. Crassus suppressed his anger and pursed his lips at Julian. Heh, you can only go for 2 days. After that, Mr. Mack will be on leave again. 2 days is no big deal. If I teach her, 1 day is better than 3 days for some people, Julian said in a hoarse voice. He looked at Julian with a hint of provocation in his eyes. Cross's eyes narrowed slightly as he looked at Urian and asked, "Seems like you want to compete? If I don't move, I'm going to get old." Julian reached into his sleeve, and a black magic staff appeared in his hand. Please calm down, masters. We're too close to the cafeteria, and there are too many people here." Brantley braced himself and stood between the two of them. The magic barrier around him had already been fully activated, and he could feel the impact of ice and fire on both sides. As a 7th-tier magic caster, he was highly respected in the Grey Temple. However, in front of these two living legends of the magic world, he was only a junior. Recently, his job was to keep an eye on the two of them and prevent them from fighting. This was really a job that required one's life. At the city gate, Meg felt everyone's gazes, including the cold gaze of the frost dragon in the sky. He also realized that they seemed to be a little too high profile. He stepped forward and shielded Amy behind him and looked at the frost dragon warily. After all, he was no longer the dragon-slaying warrior he used to be. "System, can I sell Italian cannons?" Meg quickly asked in his mind. "You can't afford them," the system replied calmly. "If I die, no one will buy them from you in the future," Meg continued. "No, there's still a lot of demand for these classic cannons," the system retorted. "You're fucking selling firearms to other people?" Meg raised an eyebrow. "Who said that? How could I do something like that? Don't slander me. This is the system's business, so how could I peddle it?" The system immediately became a little anxious. All of the mercenaries looked at Meg, who immediately stood in front of Amy, and looked at him with admiration. At least this man had some guts. However, angering a giant dragon wasn't going to be easy. They could only hope that the giant dragon would be a little more forgiving and think that Amy's words were a compliment, not a provocation. Chapter 222. Everyone hurriedly backed away at the sight of the woman who had appeared out of thin air. Her frosty aura had already revealed her identity. Meg looked at the woman with a wary expression. This was perhaps the most dangerous situation he had encountered after coming to this world. However, perhaps it was because he had fused with Meg Alex's memories, but he didn't feel any fear from the moment the giant dragon appeared. Instead, he was more on guard against her. Meanwhile, Amy, who was being shielded behind Meg, peeked her head out with elation in her little eyes. The tall hounds nearby were so scared that they crouched on the ground and didn't dare to make a sound. However, Ugly Duckling, who was being held in Amy's arms, was very eager and fearless. It waved its little paws as if it were showing off its fangs and claws. The woman's skin was as fair as snow, and she was around 20 years old. She was extremely beautiful, but her expression and disposition were extremely cold, as if she were an otherworldly celestial maiden who had descended from the heavens. Her long dress was as if it had been carved from ice and snow. Her deep blue eyes moved away from Meg and fell on Ugly Duckling, who was being held in Amy's arms. She paused for a moment with a hint of confusion in her eyes. She then looked up at Amy, and her eyes lit up slightly. The frosty aura enshrouding Meg and Amy instantly disappeared, and she also withdrew her gaze before walking toward the city. Large snowflakes blossomed on the ground with every step she took. What a strange little thing. She's not afraid of me? Looks like she's most likely a little kitten with brain damage. Elizabeth shook her head slightly as she murmured to herself in a voice that only she could hear. Frost rose from beneath her feet, and she disappeared into the city in the blink of an eye. As soon as the woman left, the oppressive aura instantly disappeared, and the frosty aura also slowly dissipated. Everyone present heaved a sigh of relief. The giant dragon's aura was simply too frightening. If a 7th-tier magic caster or 7th-tier knight were standing here, they wouldn't have felt so suffocating. Everyone glanced at Mag and his wife. This father and daughter pair were quite lucky to have met a giant dragon with a good temper and tolerance. Then, they continued on their journey. "Wow, father, that big sister white dragon was so beautiful. And why did she suddenly disappear?" Amy jumped out from behind Meg and looked at Meg with curiosity and elation in her eyes. She must have used some kind of teleportation magic. If he were to be killed as soon as he stepped out of the city gates, it would be the most humiliating adventure in history. Of. Of. All right, I'll help you talk to the teachers tomorrow. Mag smiled. He really didn't know how to do that. Let's go. Mag patted Amy's head with a smile. He then poked Ugly Duckling's head with a finger and said, Ugly Duckling, don't show hostility to others so casually in the future. You're not even good enough to fill the gaps between people's teeth. Are you going to show them your cute little paws? Meow. Ugly Duckling looked at its little paws with an aggrieved expression and raised its paws with all its might. Curl up. Amy patted it with her little hand. Meow. Ugly Duckling immediately retracted its paws and nestled in her arms as obedient as it could be. Meg pulled out a map from his bag. As a common first-tier magic beast, fire chickens were widely distributed outside Chaos City and could be found in many places. Let's go to the outskirts of Stranglethornvale. It's less dangerous there. Meg looked at the map carefully for a while. After identifying the direction, he put away the map and took Amy's little hand and led her forward. If this map had been given to Meg in his previous life, it would have been incomprehensible. But now, Meg could easily understand all the information contained in it. As a general on the front line, Alex's professionalism was unquestionable. Thorns Ridge was one of the less dangerous places outside the city. It was famous for its thorny bushes. Of course, this was only in comparison to other places where 7th-tier and 8th-tier magic beasts often appeared. In Stranglethornvale, 5th-tier magic beasts often appeared, 3rd-tier and 4th-tier magic beasts were everywhere, and 1st-tier and 2st-tier magic beasts could be seen everywhere. Although it was called a valley, it was actually made up of several valleys and a mountain range. There were all kinds of treasures and herbs in the thorny bushes that had not been spoiled by magic beasts. The bounty for these things could be higher than that of a high-tier magic beast, so it had become the target of many mercenaries. Because high-tier magic beasts rarely appeared, generally, 2 or 3 4th-tier mercenaries would be able to enter Stranglethornvale without worry. Whether it was to find herbs or hunt magic beasts, it was a good place to go. Also, Chaos City gave the mercenaries of the Chaos Guild the strongest protection and rule. During missions, they were not allowed to kill each other. If there was an unnatural death of a member, the guild would investigate to the end. No matter what kind of background or strength the killer had, Chaos City would not tolerate it. A life for a life. A few years ago, the higher-ups of the Grey Temple took action and killed a dozen high-tier mercenaries, including a 9th-tier demon. After that, this rule became deeply ingrained in the hearts of the people. Unless you were absolutely sure that you would not be discovered, killing and robbing would not happen in the Chaos Guild. Meg was going to the western slope of Stranglethorn Vale. There was a hot spring there, and the temperature was much higher than the surrounding area, so turkeys were often seen there. There was a flat ground paved with black stones in front of the city gate, and the road after that was paved with the footsteps of the mercenaries. A team of knights in light armor rode along the main road in the middle, kicking up a cloud of dust and causing some people to grumble in displeasure. An old mercenary was driving his donkey cart at a leisurely pace. Behind him sat 4 youths who still had some childishness in them. They were looking around curiously, and it seemed that they were rookie mercenaries who had left the city for the first time. There were 5 or 6 horses following behind them, and the people on the horses were all fully armed mercenaries. Whether it was their equipment or their demeanor, it was obvious that they were veterans who had been in the wilderness for many years. Today, they had probably brought the rookies out to see the world. Of course, the most eye-catching one was Meg. He was carrying a small satchel, holding a 4-year-old little Loli, and the little Loli was holding a little orange cat in her arms. This combination was perfect for an autumn outing, but now, they were going into the dangerous wilderness. Wasn't this a suicide mission? Father, why are they all looking at us with strange expressions? Amy asked as she turned to Mag with a perplexed expression. Chapter 223. I think so too. Father is super handsome. Amy nodded in agreement. Daughter, I'm going to get carried away if you keep praising me like that. Meg patted Amy's head with a smile before holding her little hand and continuing onward. Father, what's a daughter? Can I eat it? Amy asked with a curious look on her face. No, you can't. Meg shook his head with a smile. After walking for a while, the crowd parted, and Meg and Amy were finally able to enjoy some peace and quiet. Ugly Duckling was placed on the ground by Amy, and it was running in front of her. At this moment, it was chasing after a butterfly, and its bell-like laughter reverberated throughout the plains. As expected, I have to take these two out to play more often. I'll leave the city from the north on my next day off, Meg thought to himself as he looked at Amy and Ugly Duckling with a wide smile on his face. System, give me the sword, Meg said in his heart as he extended his hand forward with a calm expression. That's how powerful experts usually receive swords, right? Ding! A long sword fell from the sky, right next to Meg's nose, and the cold light emanating from it almost blinded his eyes. It stabbed firmly into the ground between his legs, and the hilt of the sword swayed slightly. Meg's body completely stiffened, and only after a while did his throat move. He looked down at the sword, which was still swaying from the hilt. If it had been even a centimeter off course, his nose and a certain part of his body would most likely have said goodbye to him. System, you've been getting a little carried away lately, haven't you? Meg repressed his rage. My apologies, host. The signal in the wilderness isn't very good, so there was a slight deviation in the positioning. Thankfully, it was delivered to you accurately. The system's apologetic voice sounded. It even added a sonorous slogan at the end. System Express Delivery, mission accomplished. Accomplished? Accomplished my ass. This is murder. Mag stomped his foot as his legs went numb, and he stumbled back a couple of steps. He looked at the long sword, which had been embedded into a black rock on the ground. The blade of the long sword was glowing with a cold light, and it had almost been sliced open by such a sharp long sword. Why was the system advertising him here? This system had indeed gone overboard. Host, this is baseless slander. It is also an insult to a hard-working employee like me. However, as a system with professional ethics, I will not argue with you today. The system replied seriously. Integrity? Heh, with your delivery attitude and standard, I'm going to give you a bad review. Return. I won't buy it in the future. Meg curled his lips and said coldly, Dear, if you have something to say, let's talk nicely. Negative reviews and refunds won't solve the problem. If you have any dissatisfaction or needs, please be sure to tell me. The system's voice suddenly became very friendly. Chapter 224. Hearing Amy's praise, Meg's expression suddenly turned serious. He calmly sheathed his sword and nodded. It was just a small test. But father, isn't that a sword? Amy asked, puzzled. Yes, it's just a metaphor. Mag cleared his throat upon seeing this. He was rather surprised by the speed and power of this sword strike. Mag Alex had practiced this sword strike countless times in the past, and his body had already memorized the angle from which the sword strike should be unleashed, as well as the strength and speed with which it should be unleashed. Meg had originally planned to run to the balcony every night to secretly practice the sword so that he could learn the sword techniques in his mind as soon as possible, but now it seemed that he didn't need to work so hard. What he needed to do was to adapt to the speed of the sword technique as soon as possible and let his mind catch up with the sword. This way, he would be able to perform the sword technique to the extreme with his current physical fitness. At this level, he should be invincible among those of the same level. If he was lucky, he might even be able to kill someone above his level. In conclusion, there was no need to level up. It seems that the right way to level up is to cook well, earn money well, and get the strength points from the system and buy new strength points. Meg thought to himself, this was good too. If he had to run the restaurant during the day and practice the sword at night, it would be too tiring and he wouldn't have time to accompany Amy. Father, where did you put your sword just now? Amy asked curiously as she looked at the shiny silver sword in Meg's hand. Up in the sky. Meg pointed up. It had indeed fallen from above. Wow, really? Father, that sword technique was so powerful. Amy wants to learn. Amy's eyes lit up as she looked at Meg expectantly. Amy wants to learn the sword? Meg suddenly stopped and looked at Amy with some hesitation. Meg Alex was the continent's #1 knight in the past, and his sword technique was naturally #1 as well. However, Amy was now learning magic, and she was also a long-range and melee fighter. If she also learned the sword from him, it seemed that she would have to learn too many things. She was still young, so she could not have some time to play. That's right. Amy nodded seriously and looked at the long sword in Meg's hand with sparkling eyes. I want to be like Father and be able to cut down the small tree in one go. That way, if anyone dares to bully Father in the future, I'll cut them down. When Meg saw Amy's expectant expression, a smile appeared on his face. He nodded and said, "All right, I'll teach you when we get back. But you'll only practice for a while every day, and you're not allowed to tell anyone after you've practiced." Not even Master Halfbeard or Master Julian? Amy asked. Yeah, even Big Sister Mia can't do it. Now is the time to tell our little secret. The purplish-blue flames swept past, and the black fur on his body, which was as thick as a pinky finger, was all set ablaze. The bronze pigskin that had a metallic luster turned golden red in an instant, as if it had been melted. After a moment of silence, the bronze wild boar let out an extremely tragic cry. Its entire body was on fire, and it madly turned around and ran up the mountain. However, it only ran for a few dozen meters before collapsing to the ground. After twitching a few times, it stopped breathing completely. The air was filled with the aroma of roasted pig. How is this possible? A 4-year-old third-level magician? Guy had witnessed everything with his own eyes, and his lips were trembling. His shock was indescribable. It wasn't that he hadn't seen more powerful magic casters before, but this little half-elf girl was simply too young. If news of a 4-year-old third-level magic caster were to spread, the entire Norland continent would be in an uproar. The last prodigy magic caster to shake the entire continent was Princess Irina of the Elven race. She was born with an affinity for magic and became a first-level magic caster at the age of 3. When she was 5, she was already a third-level magic caster. After that, she became a 10th-tier great magic caster at the age of 26. Her aptitude was unmatched among the younger generation, and she dominated the entire world. With the Elven race's lifespan of at least 800 years, no one knew what heights she would reach in the future. Even the Elven Queen had taken over 40 years to become a 10th-tier great magic caster. However, this little half-elf girl was already able to easily cast a spell that was comparable to the full force attack of a 3rd-tier magic caster. Her aptitude was perhaps even greater than that of the Elven princess. She was bound to become a dazzling star in the magic world. Perhaps she could even reach the same heights as the Elven princess and become an unprecedented half-elf great magic caster. Looks like I was overthinking things. They came prepared. It's just that the little girl was the one protecting them. Guy glanced at the golden-brown roasted copper boar and sheathed his javelin with an awkward expression. Do they have to be so cruel? Before the explosion occurred, Mag had already retreated a few meters with the system's warning, but he was still almost thrown into the hot spring by the shockwave. He was also dumbstruck as he stared at the bronze wild boar that had already turned into a golden roast pig. He had always known that Amy was a prodigy. Otherwise, the two great magic casters, Crassus and Julian, wouldn't have fought over Amy as their disciple. However, when did the cute little fireball in Amy's hand become so powerful? Although it had burned Sargeras and Crassus, it was only burning. However, the fireball that had just exploded was no less powerful than a small artillery shell. Meg looked at Amy, who was playing with Ugly Duckling with her little feet, and said with a smile, "Okay, dry your little feet. Let's go home." "Okay." Amy nodded. She rubbed her wet little feet on Ugly Duckling's face and giggled. Meow, meow. Ugly Duckling wiped its face with its little paws and looked pitifully at Meg for help. Half of its clothes were wet, but its 4 little paws were very clean. Meg took out a dry towel from his small bag and helped Amy dry her little feet first. Then, he wiped the water off Ugly Duckling's body. He took out a biji bun from his bag, broke it in half, and handed it to Amy. He took a bite of the other half to replenish his energy. The biji bun in the morning was specially baked for a while. It was crispy and delicious, and it didn't choke like the pancakes. It tasted a little like a big steamed bun. "Father, this pancake is so delicious. I want to eat another one after I finish it." Amy held the pancake with her 2 little hands and ate it happily. She was eating like a cute little squirrel. Meow, meow. Ugly Duckling looked up at Meg and called out twice. It felt as if it had been forgotten. "Then eat another one." Meg nodded with a smile. He took out another pancake, broke a small piece, and fed it to Ugly Duckling. He handed the rest to Amy. After eating the dessert, Meg put Ugly Duckling into his bag and then carried Amy on his back. He held the pig's tooth that was more than half a meter long in one hand and the fire chicken that weighed more than 50 kilograms in the other, and walked slowly down the mountain. Amy looked around with her eagle eyes while lying on Meg's back, and suddenly asked curiously, "Father, where's your sword?" "It flew up into the sky again," Meg said with a smile as he walked down the mountain with light steps. "Really? Can we still call it down?" Amy looked up at the sky and asked curiously. "That might be a little difficult." The father and daughter chatted as they went down the mountain along the path that they had opened up earlier. "That's why it's getting heavier." Meg smiled as he looked at Ugly Duckling, whose eyes lit up as it turned to look at him. He continued, "But I think it's good to run 10 laps before bed. You need to exercise when you're growing." Meow. Ugly Duckling continued to look up into the sky. "Let's go. It's great that Amy came here on her own. Come on up, and we'll go on the bike." Meg squatted down with a smile. After Amy got on, they walked into the city. "Huh, Captain, isn't that the father and daughter from this morning? They're back so soon." "Is that a turkey in his hand? Could that be the tusk of a bronze-skinned wild boar in his other hand?" The guards at the city gate also noticed Meg, who was carrying Amy on his back. 2 young guards couldn't help but exclaim softly, "Chaos City is full of crouching tigers and hidden dragons. We really can't underestimate anyone." Barty nodded slightly as he looked at Meg's back. He was also a little surprised. After entering the city, Meg directly said in his mind, "System, I want to pick up my bike." After walking for an entire morning, he was also a little tired. System learning. However, only that line of words kept repeating in his mind. Meg raised an eyebrow. "This system is finished." Suddenly, a small icon appeared in the lower right corner of his eyes. On it were the words, "Self-Service Bike Pickup." He tried to click on it with his mind, and a 3-dimensional map immediately popped up. It was a map with a radius of 50 meters around him, and it prompted him to choose a location to pick up his bike. Meg looked around and decided to pick up his bike in the empty alley next to him. After hearing the notification that the bike had arrived, he walked into the alley with Amy. "Get on. Let's go home." Looking at the bicycle parked in the alley, Meg said with a smile, "This system is smart. It knows to set up a self-service bike pickup service." "Okay, let's go home." Amy nodded happily. She ran to the bicycle, put Ugly Duckling in the basket, and climbed onto the back seat. Meow. Ugly Duckling clung onto the basket with its little paws and looked at Amy with a pitiful expression. "Ugly Duckling, hold on." Meg put the pig's tooth in the basket and got on the bicycle. He held the handle with one hand and the turkey with the other, and the bicycle sped forward. It turned out of the alley and headed toward the Aiden Square. Meow. Ugly Duckling tried its best to hug the pig's tooth, which was rolling around in the basket to give itself some space. I hope there aren't any customers at the entrance. Meg looked at his watch. It was 11 o'clock a.m. Usually, there would be customers lining up at the entrance of the restaurant at this time. Since he had said that he would take a day off, he naturally had to keep his word. If he said he would take a day off, then he would take a day off. Meg had to give his hands some time to recover. Fried rice and tofu pudding were fine, but making rujiamo required kneading the dough. The wounds on his hands and right hands couldn't be healed. There were no customers at the entrance of the restaurant, but Meg saw a mountain of knives half a meter high in the distance. They reflected the cold light of the sun, and his eyes were almost blinded. So fierce. Meg raised his eyebrows. He could feel the terrible resentment of the customers from the glint of the knives and swords. Wow, so many beautiful knives and swords. Father, can I choose one? Amy's eyes lit up as she looked at the pile of knives and swords expectantly. Okay, then Amy can choose one that you like. The bicycle stopped at the entrance of the restaurant, and Meg nodded with a smile. Some of the knives and swords looked very delicate and sharp. Rich people are really different when they are capricious. He changed them into a clean and refreshing aqua blue dress and tied their hair into two cute ponytails. He let the two little ones go downstairs to play, and then he turned on the water and took a bath himself. My body is still too weak. It's not a problem for me to face a first-tier magic beast, and I might be able to fight a second-tier magic beast. But if it's a third-tier magic beast, I can only run, and I'm not confident that I'll be able to escape. Meg closed his eyes and pondered. Of course, he was just teasing the system. As a man who aspired to be a model father, how could he not be strong enough to protect his daughter? However, today's small test had given Meg a lot of confidence. His body was indeed like an untapped treasure trove. Every time he upgraded his strength, he would be able to unlock a portion of his abilities. He was very much looking forward to this kind of growth potential. After he fully recovered and continued to upgrade his strength, would he be able to surpass Meg Alex when he was at his peak? That was something that was worth looking forward to. Only by becoming truly powerful could he ensure that what happened 3 years ago wouldn't happen again. Meg had no interest in experiencing the same despair again. To increase your strength, you have to start by cooking every dish. Meg came out of the water and wiped himself dry with a towel. He looked at himself in the mirror with a smile. There were already a few visible muscles on his abdomen, and his black eyes were especially bright and spirited. His dejected look was gone. Meg changed into a clean chef's suit and went downstairs. The air in the restaurant was fresh and humid, and the floor, tables, and chairs were all very clean and bright. Amy was squatting on the floor and playing with Ugly Duckling. Sally was looking intently at Amy and Ugly Duckling, and she turned around upon hearing the sound. She stood up. Have a seat. Relax when you're not working. The restaurant is very clean, Meg said with a smile. Only Sally could clean the entire restaurant so well. Sally nodded and sat down again with a hint of joy in her eyes. Meg walked into the kitchen, and Yabamiya was doing the final cleaning. The turkey had already been prepared and placed in a large basin. There wasn't a single hair on its dark red skin, and its stomach had also been prepared. The edible parts had been washed and placed on plates, and the chicken feathers had been thrown into the kitchen waste bin. The entire kitchen was still clean and tidy, and it didn't look any worse after killing the turkey. Boss, do I need to cut the turkey out? Is this okay? Yabamiya, whose sleeves were rolled up, turned to Meg with a hint of nervousness and anticipation in her eyes. This was the first time she had participated in the preparation of ingredients since she came to the restaurant. Well, Mia did a great job, but I'll take care of the rest. You can go out and have a rest. Chapter 237. It's almost time for the monthly Aiden Square Aiden Square Aiden Squares 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 Monthly Aiden Square Aiden Square Aiden Square Aiden Square Aiden Square Aiden Squares restaurants have been in the top 18 months in a row, and the president hopes that everyone can give their full support to the restaurants under our Chamber of Commerce this time. This is the list of restaurants for this month, and every vote of the employees is very important. Unity and cooperation are the tenets of the Chamber of Commerce, and also the foundation of our foothold on the Norland continent. There were more than 30 people sitting in a large conference hall. A middle-aged man with meticulously combed hair stood up and announced loudly. Two servants walked up to each of them and handed out a stack of white name lists. Most of the people sitting in the conference hall were men, all of whom were dressed lavishly, and one could see that they were wearing expensive accessories. Any one of them was a renowned boss in the Aiden Square, as well as a core member of the board of directors of the Chamber of Commerce. However, at this moment, they were all sitting in silence, listening to the middle-aged man speak. There was only a woman in a bright red dress sitting in the corner. She had fiery red lips, and the corners of her lips were slightly curled up as she looked on with a hint of mockery in her eyes. However, she only sat there quietly and didn't say anything. A coin that was half dragon coin and half gold coin was spinning nimbly between her fingers. At the head of the table, next to the middle-aged man, sat a skinny old man with a somewhat old-fashioned expression. He wore a grayish-white buttoned gown, and his sparse white hair was neatly combed to the back of his head. The shape of his white beard was a little strange. The lower end of his beard was not naturally pointed, but it was cut in the middle, so the shape of his face looked a little square, and he looked even more old-fashioned. "President, is there anything else I can do for you?" the middle-aged man asked in a humble manner. Everyone turned to look at the old man with a hint of awe and veneration in their eyes. This was Geoffrey Moreton, the founder of the Chamber of Commerce. He had founded the Chamber of Commerce with the Buffett family, the Dodges family, and the Marquis family, and after over 50 years of development, it had become a renowned Chamber of Commerce on the entire continent. The Moreton family was also extremely renowned on the Norland continent. They dominated the spice market, as well as food and cloth industries. Their business empire had already encompassed the entire Norland continent. "Why are you here?" Geoffrey ignored the middle-aged man's question and turned to the woman in the red dress sitting in the corner.